This video is made possible by the realistic online game War Thunder. You can check out this game through the link in the description below. Go through our link, and not only do you help support this show, which is great, but you also get a free premium tank or aircraft or ship, and 3 days of premium time as a bonus. And let's get into it. The commonly held notion that World War I was started out of outrage over the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and his wife Sophie at the hands of the Serbian nationalist secret society known as the Black Hand is not entirely correct. In fact, the Emperor Franz Josef himself expressed relief over the assassination because it rid him of an heir that he deeply disliked. The Emperor commented that God will not be mocked. A higher power had put back the order I couldn't maintain. It wasn't just the Emperor who was seemingly pleased. The general consensus among the various political circles was that the assassination, though a tragedy, was really for the best. As far as the Austrian people were concerned, it was noted in said paper, the event almost failed to make any impression whatsoever. On Sunday and Monday, the crowds in Vienna listened to music and drank wine as if nothing had happened. So, why go to war over an assassination if nobody cared? Because, well, while nobody seemed to care much about the assassination itself, Austria-Hungary had been looking for an excuse to wage a preventative war against Serbia as a state in order to weaken or destroy them so that they could take back territory in the Balkans that had been taken from them during the Balkan Wars. They had not taken it back up to that point because they lacked Germany's support. Without that support, they feared Russia too much because Russia had a treaty with Serbia. With the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife in June of 1914, Austria-Hungary was ready to secure the promise from Germany that it would aid in a war with Serbia and possibly Russia if Russia chose to enter the fray. It should be noted here that Austria-Hungary did not really expect Russia to enter the fight, as they expected this to be a very small war that would be over quickly before Russia would really feel obligated to help. Now, with Germany's support, if Russia did enter the war, Austria-Hungary issued an ultimatum to Serbia with remarkably severe terms that Serbia would be sure to reject, thus giving Austria-Hungary an excuse to launch a limited war on Serbia to reclaim territory in the Balkans. Surprisingly, Serbia responded relatively well to the ultimatum, but they did dispute a few clauses, giving Austria-Hungary the excuse they needed to go to war. At this point, the following general series of events happened due to a variety of existing treaties between various nations, escalating this minor clash into the First Great War. Russia, bound by their treaty with Serbia, decided to come to Serbia's aid. Germany, with the recent treaty with Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia. France, bound by an existing treaty with Russia, was now at war with Germany by association. Germany then invaded neutral Belgium to have easy access to France. Britain, allied with France with an existing treaty, declared war against Germany. This was unexpected by Germany, as they thought Britain would stay out of the war due to the fact that the treaty with France was loosely worded and not entirely binding. However, Britain also had a 75-year-old treaty with Belgium, so because of both of these treaties, they decided to declare war on Germany. With Britain now warring with Germany, Canada, India, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa were obligated to enter the war as well. Japan then honored an existing treaty with Britain and declared war on Germany. Austria-Hungary declared war on Japan for declaring war on Germany. All of this brings us to the spring of 1917, when the United States officially entered World War I. Short on soldiers and seamen, the military needed volunteers. While New York City had a population of around 6.5 million people at the time, it was nonetheless lagging behind in its goal of having 2,000 recruits to the United States Navy by just under half. To get around this problem, New York City's mayor, John P. Mitchell, decided that he needed a gimmick to spark young men's interests and convince them to volunteer for the war. And what better way to draw attention to the Navy than to construct a battleship in the middle of Union Square? Teaming up with the Navy on the project, the Mayor's Committee on National Defense raised approximately $10,000, that's about $187,000 today, to fund the ship, and hired Jules Guerin and Don Barber to design the appropriately named USS Recruit, basing the design loosely on the USS Maine. With work completed rapidly by the US Navy, the USS Recruit, also known as the Landship Recruit, was built on the island of Manhattan. Construction finished for a launch on May 30th, 1917, with the ship being christened by Olive Mitchell, the mayor's wife. The wooden battleship mock-up measured over 200 feet long and had a beam or width of 40 feet. While not actually armed for battle, the ship featured wooden replicas of 2 cage masts, 6 14-inch guns inside 3 twin turrets, and 10 5-inch guns. It also had 2 50-foot masts, an 18-foot tall smokestack, a main bridge, and a conning tower. As you might expect, the Recruit was designed such that it contained ample space for the job of recruiting and training sailors, with multiple waiting rooms and physical exam rooms complete with full amenities, as well as space for doctors, officers, and sailors to live aboard the ship in their separate quarters. As for the latter, the initial complement was 39 sailors in training and their commander, Captain C.F. Pierce. The crew maintained a similar routine to one of a crew at sea. As reported by Popular Science magazine in August of 1917, the land sailors arise at 6 o'clock, scrub the decks, wash their clothes, attend instruction classes, and then stand guard and answer questions for the remainder of the day. There is a night as well as a day guard. From sunup to 11 o'clock, all lights on the ship are turned on, including a series of searchlight projectors. In addition to recruiting volunteers for the Navy and training new sailors, the USS Recruit also served as a public relations tool. Citizens were invited onto the ship to learn about then modern battleships, and the sailors aboard routinely answered the public's questions during their guard duty. Both patriotic and social events were also held on the battleship, with the sailors acting as hosts. One patriotic event, according to a contemporary account from the New York Times, was the presentation of a recreation of Betsy Ross's American flag. Other events were just as social in nature, such as dances held for New York's social elite. There were even reportedly vaudeville shows held on board. World War I ended in November of 1918, when both Austria-Hungary and Germany agreed to an armistice while the terms of peace could be negotiated. However, the USS Recruit continued its recruitment mission until March of 1920. Alright, so how did it do in its goal of helping to boost recruitment levels? In its approximately 3-year run, it helped the Navy recruit an astounding 25,000 new sailors, enough to man the USS Maine, which the Recruit was loosely modeled after, a whopping 45 times over. At this time, the Navy announced that it would move the wooden battleship from Union Square to Luna Park on Coney Island and maintain it as a recruitment site there. The New York Times described the sailing of the Recruit in an article on March 17, 1920 as such. Yesterday, when 10 o'clock came around, and with it sailing time, all of the ceremonies were put on. The crew of 80 men lined up on the quarterdeck, and the ship was formally abandoned while the Stars and Stripes and the commissioned pennant were hauled down. The ship's band struck up the Star-Spangled Banner as the colors were lowered to the deck. The ship was then carefully dismantled over the course of a few days, with the pieces shipped off to Coney Island. Though the New York Times estimated that it would take just 2 weeks for the Navy to complete the move of the battleship, it was never rebuilt. Apparently out of sight, out of mind, no contemporary news source seems to have bothered to cover why the ship, which was supposedly to be immediately rebuilt, was not. What happened to the pieces of the dismantled ship is also a mystery to this day. A search through the Navy archives by us for the period in question likewise turned up nothing insightful concerning the ship's demise. Presumably, it was simply decided at the last minute that rebuilding and maintaining the ship was an unnecessary expense given the Navy's recruitment needs at the time. Whatever the case, while this was the end of the Union Square battleship, it would not be the end for the name in the US Navy. The USS Recruit AM-285 was launched in 1943 and served during World War II before being decommissioned in 1946 and ultimately sold to the Mexican Navy in 1963. Following this, another landlocked ship was built, the USS Recruit TDE-1, at the San Diego Naval Training Center in 1949. Built to scale at 2/3 the size of a Dealey-class destroyer escort, the ship was made of wood with sheet metal overlay and was used to train tens of thousands of recruits over the coming decades. It was, however, decommissioned in 1967, funny enough, because it could not be classified in the Navy's new computerized registry. However, commissioned or not, it was in continuous service from 1949 to 1997, with a complete remodel in 1982. Its service finished in 1997 because the base it was on was closed. While no longer being used, the ship still stands, with some thought to perhaps turn it into a maritime museum at some point. Now, you might not want to take that ship into battle, but instead you might want to download War Thunder and get a free ship to play with. And I want to tell you about that game before we get into today's bonus fact. Best way for me to do that is to jump over to the computer and show you how it works.
Hey everybody, okay, so this is War Thunder. My computer is having a little struggle keeping up with me recording and playing at the same time because I've got like the really high settings turned on, because who doesn't like to see it in all its glory? So this is War Thunder. You can play with planes or boats or ships. Planes or boats or tanks, if you look along here. I think if you go to Germany, they got some tanks going on. Let's also, there's 1,200 available. Did I say they're already from 1930s to 1990s? You can customize them, modify them. You can go to modifications, and then, yeah, if you want to remove the radiator, it's not recommended. I'm going to go and destroy the highlighted target. It's a really good looking game. Look at that sunset. 9G. I am pulling 9G. That is going to be wildly uncomfortable. Yes! Woo! You can really pull some G's. Oh god, I'm getting shot. Oh god. Oh god, I'm on fire. That happens very quickly. Oh no. Oh no. I was just enjoying some sightseeing and now I'm horribly on fire. Oh no, my wings come off. Oh, this is... Oh no, how do I get out? How do I eject? Oh, this isn't... Oh. King Ratchet. You son of a...
Check out this game through the link in the description below. Going through that link will not only support this show, but you'll get a free premium tank, aircraft, or ship, and 3 days of premium time as a bonus. And let's get into those bonus facts. Speaking of christening ships, it turns out while today breaking a bottle of champagne over the hull of a ship is considered tradition before launching a vessel in certain countries, particularly Britain and the United States, people have been performing ceremonies at launches seemingly as long as humans have made boats. Like today, this was essentially for the hope of good fortune on the ship's voyages. For instance, one of the earliest known references to a similar practice when launching a ship goes all the way back to about 5,000 years ago, when a Babylonian stated, "To the gods, I caused oxen to be sacrificed," before launching a new ship that it made. The ancient Greeks, Romans, and Egyptians also called upon their various gods to protect a new ship and her crew upon its initial launch. For example, the ancient Greeks during the launch festivities would drink wine to honor the gods and pour water on the ship as a sort of blessing. The religious aspects of ship christening remained well into more modern times, particularly in Catholic nations. For example, there's an account of a ship christening by the Knights of Malta in the 17th century that describes two friars boarding a new warship, praying and sprinkling holy water all around the ship before deeming her seaworthy and sending her out into the water. After the Protestant Reformation kicking off in earnest after Martin Luther's 1517-95 thesis, certain nations in Europe did away with some aspects of the religious part of the christening. Rather than use religious leaders for this task, members of the monarchy or military leaders would take over the christening duties. For instance, 65 years before the aforementioned Knights of Malta reference in 1610, the Prince of Wales was present at the christening of the Prince Royal. In this instance, there was a standing cup on board the ship, which is just a large and expensive cup made of some precious metal, usually silver. The prince took a ceremonial sip of wine in the cup before throwing the rest of the contents across the deck. The cup was then thrown off the side of the ship to be caught by a lucky observer. Late in the 17th century, the standing cup ceremony was replaced with bringing a bottle of wine over the bow. This switch was in part because the cups were extremely valuable and the British Navy was growing rapidly, and it wasn't practical to continue giving away expensive cups every time a ship was launched. As for the switch from wine to champagne, it's thought that preferences simply changed over time. Champagne came to be seen as an aristocratic choice for a time in the 19th century, being more popular than wine among the elite and therefore considered the best option for a ship christening. The tradition of using it has just stuck around ever since in certain countries. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, you know what to do. Please do hit that thumbs up button below and don't forget to subscribe. Also, please do check out War Thunder. There is a link to them below. And as always, thank you for watching.